Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Unlocking Doors podcast. I'm here with Michelle Castle. Today we're going to talk about 5 things to avoid if you're looking to be a buy and hold investor and you're looking to build your rental portfolio, so stick around.
So Cory, let's talk money. You know, if you're going to be an investor in real estate, you got to figure out what your budget is, right? And then how are you going to borrow that money if you're not going to pay cash?
Right.
So I know you and I've had this conversation many a times. It's easy enough to go to the bank and go borrow the money for a bank loan. The pitfall to that is, or the things to avoid whenever you're doing bank financing is those are usually renewable notes.
Right.
So you got to
explain that to people who may not understand what you mean renewable notes. Yeah.
So it's whenever you go to a mortgage company, you have a fixed rate mortgage.
Right.
So the terms of that loan is not going to change.
Right.
You also don't have to, you qualify the first time and you're done. So if there's any changes in your employment or how your income is structured, or if there's any credit changes or whatever happens, it doesn't matter because it's a fixed rate mortgage. When you go to the bank to get a loan for investment property, you do have to renew that loan every 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So they're going to look at your financials again, they're going to look at your credit again, and the terms of the loan could change up or down. When I say terms, the length of the loan and the interest rate could change.
Yeah, and that's
now,
what you'd call an adjustable rate mortgage.
That's
right.
It's a balloon note.
Right.
It balloons and you have to renew it. Or the bank could say, you know, we're no longer doing these type of loans
Right.
anymore, so go find your financing somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you like that, you know, I'm going to buy this house and I know what my interest and my payments are going to be, then that's maybe not a good option for
Right.
you.
Right. And so you're talking about something that might have a balloon payment on it, but if it is something that's more like an adjustable rate mortgage, because I've gotten some loans
There
from
are
our
some,
local credit union, local bank that will do, you know, they might do like a purchase plus rehab loan for me to fix up a rental, but in 3 to 5 years, that's going to adjust. And so that's more what I thought that's where you were going with that. But that is also something to be aware of.
It is.
Especially if you look at, I mean, a great example is, okay, 5 years ago, if you bought something in 2019 or you bought something in 2020,
You probably had a 5 or 6% interest rate.
Yeah, or I bought some property with 4% interest rate.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I got a 4% note from a bank that, or 4.5, 4.25, something.
Low.
But if you get that and you're running your numbers off of 4.5%, in 5 years when it goes to adjust, and then your property taxes have gone up, your insurance premiums have gone up, now your interest rate goes up. That can really not work out in your favor.
Right.
And something that may be cash flowing $500 or $600 a month, now all of that is eaten up, and you may even be bringing some money to your, you know, to make your payments on top of what you're collecting in rent. So whenever you talk about smart money for a loan, if you're going to be buying and holding this property for 20 or 30 years and that's your long-term goal, which if you're buying rentals, that's usually, you want to look at it.
You're in for the long game usually.
For the long game. Make sure you have a fixed rate and a fixed mortgage. So that is a great point.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think another thing that people underestimate is you're going to have, it's not normal for you to have the same tenant for 3 and 4 and 5 years.
Right.
There's gonna be some changes in their lives, or maybe you even feel like, hey, this isn't a great relationship and I need to get, you know, we don't want to renew the lease. So
Right.
I think a lot of people miscalculate the amount of months that they might be without any rental income.
Yeah. And that's something, you know, if you look at any rental spreadsheets that you can find online, or if you just build out your own spreadsheet, you want to calculate what is a realistic expectation for vacancies and also repairs between tenants. I mean, there's expenses associated with turnover and just with normal wear and tear that happens to a property. And if you're not budgeting for those items along the way, then that's something that can really kind of sneak up on you and not work out in your favor.
When we're calculating the cash flow on rental property and on the mortgage side of things, it's 25% vacancy.
Right.
So the expectation is that, you know, there's going to be 25% of the year that it will be vacant. So
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And to get very realistic numbers, you could have, like if you're maybe not necessarily looking at it on the mortgage side, but if you're an investor who's wanting to know what that is, you can have your real estate agent go and look, what's the average days on market to get similar properties leased out?
Oh, yeah.
And that'll give you a pretty realistic idea of what to expect.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. Now, when you're buying rental property, you're going to have closing costs
Right.
and what we call the close and hold expenses. So, explain that a little bit.
So whenever some people may look at, well, I'm just going to put my 20% down and I'm going to have my cash on cash return of X number of dollars per year. And that's what I'm shooting for. And you want to make sure that you're including some of your other closing costs, like your loan origination fees, survey, title, lawyer, inspections, things of those nature, or things of that nature, that you're kind of putting into your return on investment calculations. And those items, I mean, they're going to be a sunk cost. Those items don't necessarily carry as much weight, in my opinion, because once again, you're looking at this over the long haul,
Right.
and those could be some, smaller numbers along the way in the grand scheme of things. But you do want to make sure that you're budgeting for that. You want to make sure you know what to expect, which is why, whether you're looking to buy a place to live in or a place to rent out, get pre-approved on the front end, and know
Look
what
at
those
those
costs
numbers.
are, before you get into the process. Because that'd be, that's the worst thing that you could do, is thinking that you're only putting 10 or 20% down and that's all the money you have. You negotiate out a deal and then you get to closing and your lender, well, 3 days before closing.
That would be terrible. Yeah, but it could happen.
Your lender's like, by the way, there's escrow, prepaid escrow monies that need to be paid in, along with the loan origination fee and just all that stuff.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, that there's some scenarios where if you're never invested before, you may even have to have extra money in your savings account that your lender is calculating reserves, because we don't want you spending every penny you have to buy investment property. We want to know that you have the money to continue to make the mortgage payment even if you don't have a tenant in the house.
So I have a question about that. What constitutes having reserves, and how much do y'all Guild Mortgage typically want to see? Like, is it just cash in the bank?
It is cash and bank, but you can use, if you've got some funds that are invested, but you have the ability to take the money. IRA wouldn't count if you're 40 years old.
Right.
But if you had the ability to withdraw the funds, that are invested somewhere else, those could be used. But it is actually cash on hand, and a lot of programs require 6 months of full payment on the house.
Okay. If an investor has multiple properties, a handful of rental properties, and y'all are going to qualify them for another mortgage.
Typically 6 months PIT of all the properties.
Okay. Okay. And that just sets the investor up for success, to make sure that if they hit some of those longer vacancies or there's some unexpected repairs, they can get the property back in a rentable, livable condition and provide a safe place for someone
and the
to
thoughts are, if they come on hard times, then it's going to affect all properties, right? And so, if you fall on hard times and you're having a hard time with all of these properties, it financially is going to snowball quickly.
Right.
So we just want to make sure that they are financially able to have that many properties and still be okay if hard times came.
Yeah. One thing I want to bring up too, and this is something that a lot of people maybe don't think about until they're actually trying to rent their place out, is looking at looking at comparable rents in a neighborhood, and also understanding how to evaluate those. So I've sold properties. Anytime I help an investor buy a property, I always advise them based on the fact that they're also going to hire me to lease that out for them. And I don't want to sell them something that I cannot confidently lease, because then I look terrible. And so I have worked with investors who have bought properties from other realtors or builders or whoever, and whoever they buy it from may make a blanket statement of, you can get $1.25 for rent in this
Oh,
neighborhood,
okay.
$1.25 per square foot for rent in this neighborhood. And it's like, that may work for an 1,800 square foot house, but you bought a 3,000 square foot house. The rent ceilings in this neighborhood are $2,500. I don't care if you have a,
Yeah.
you know, a 2,000 square foot house or a 3,000 square foot house. Nobody's paying more than $2,500 in rent
Yeah.
in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so that's something that knowing how to look at those rents and evaluate that, you know, if you're buying a 28 to 3,000 square foot house, 2,800 to 3,000 square foot, and all of your comps are 1,500 square feet, you really need to understand how to adjust that value down, because
Yeah.
you're not going to get $1.25 per square
Right.
foot on those rents.
Well, and location matters too. So,
Yes.
you know, if you're on a really busy street and your house is really set up for a family and that's going to be your ideal tenant, then are you going to get top rent market
Right. Yeah.
or top of the rent, whatever?
Yeah. Location. Yeah. Location
Location
plays.
does matter.
Location plays a big part in that, and not just whenever you're talking about who the typical tenant is going to look, or what the typical tenant's going to look like for that property, but you know, don't be looking at rents across town thinking, well, you know, I built a newer construction home in an older neighborhood, and those new construction homes in a newer neighborhood over there are getting this, so I should be able to get that.
Right.
It all has an effect on it. You want to make sure you understand what that effect is.
Yeah.
So location plays a big part in that as
Yeah.
well.
The last thing I wanted to cover, and this is one thing I think about a lot when I'm talking to investors, selecting a tenant.
Yes.
So number 5 really is the tenant selection. I know, and tell me what you do, but I know one thing that I was looking for, my assumption was that there was probably some credit challenges.
Right.
Otherwise, they might be buying a home instead. I mean, there's some exceptions to that. Maybe they're new to the area, not sure they're going to stay. No, they're not going to stay, so there's no way
Yeah.
they'd buy, whatever. But for the most part, my assumption was there's some credit challenges.
Right.
So what I always looked for is stability in employment. What is it that you're looking for in, I mean, how do you look at and go, okay, who's a good tenant and who's a bad tenant?
So we do check credit. Well, first off, I'm going to give a shameless plug to my brother Colby and
Okay.
Legacy Point Property Management. I think if you're looking to invest for the long term and you don't want to be hands-on, I think hiring a property manager
Absolutely.
is just invaluable.
Right.
So, you know, working with a property manager who's going to screen them, and then it's kind of like, you know, if they're going to put that tenant in there, they know that they have to deal with that tenant.
Right.
Whereas whenever I lease a property out, I don't personally do management. I lease the property and then it's in the landlord's hands. So it's very rare that I actually am leasing out. I mean, there's a couple of landlords that I lease out for, but usually I'm encouraging them to work with property management. But whenever we do lease a property out, we will check their credit. We're checking their tenant history, if there's been any evictions, foreclosures, bankruptcies. So we're looking at all of that.
Are you calculating their debt to income too to make sure they can afford the rent?
Yes, we look at what their income is, what their debts are, and on the credit report we can see if they have any, you know what their monthly payments are that are or their recurring monthly payments. So we look at all that. A lot, you know, sometimes what they put on their application versus what shows up there is very incongruent, and so, you know, that's why we go the extra step to check on those things. Something that's huge is checking tenant references, like the previous, you know, the previous landlord, and not necessarily just the previous, but, you know, 2 landlords ago. And what I found out, this is actually kind of interesting, but if you call the current or previous landlord, like the one that they're moving out, sometimes they may give a like, hey, I'll give you a good reference
if you'll just get out of my
house.
Yeah.
Like, I need the keys back. Please don't tear anything else up. Just get out.
Yeah.
So the previous landlord may not be the best reference. If you go back 2 landlords ago and they're like, man, I would never rent. I have had a guy tell me, he said, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Like, do not rent to this guy. He's gonna move in. He'll give you his deposit and his first month's rent. You'll spend 6 or 8 months trying to get him out. He's gonna promise you this, promise you that, talk about his hard times. just don't rent to them. And I was like, okay, I'm glad that I, didn't just stop at that first reference.
Yeah.
So that's huge. And then verifying that the pay stubs that they give you, the employment that they're saying that they're employed, looking at their bank, if they're self-employed, asking for their tax returns. I mean, there's just all different things that you want to verify.
I mean, they're really the process to rent is very similar to the process to buy.
Yeah.
And it's because, I mean, you're giving someone such a big asset.
Yeah.
And it could be turned into a liability really fast with a bad tenant.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing to avoid too when it comes to tenant selection is if it's somebody who's like, hey, I need to move in next week.
If they're in a hurry.
Hey, can I move in tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I can pay you cash. Don't do it.
That's a big avoid.
Yeah.
Avoid. Yeah.
Red flag. Like something happened to where like they just got evicted and or something happened that they're not telling you. So don't just take the first tenant that comes along and if there's red flags or things that seem off,
you're bringing back so many stories I could share, but that's not for today.
Yeah, not for today. We'll do a tenant nightmare episode one day. But anyways,
we got Halloween coming up. That would be great. Tenant nightmare stories.
Yeah. So luckily I haven't had too many, knock on wood. But anyways, that's really all I had as far as things to avoid. I think tenant selection was last on the list.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, that was a fun conversation about what to avoid if you are going to be a buy and hold investor and build up your rental portfolio. Yeah. Guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Unlocking Doors. If you're thinking about investing in real estate for the long haul, make sure you reach out to Michelle so you can talk about some of those fixed mortgage options that are going to work out best for you. If you need help finding those properties, be sure and give me a call. I'd love to help you out. Once again, I'm Cory, this is Michelle, and thanks for checking out Unlocking Doors. Yo!